This nice paper came out in Science this year in 2025, so February, I think, and there is a nice news and views article on it as well that makes, captures the main points and offers some criticism as well. Usually that's what they are supposed to do in the perspective article. So let's read that and then just look at the abstract and some figures from the paper itself. So this is an insight, so it's a perspective on the paper that we'll look at, appeared in January 2025, not February. The image here is a prop in a German forest, dead spruce trees. In a German forest, dead spruce trees stand among surviving coniferous and deciduous trees because drought impacts vary by species. So you can see the different colors here, and you can imagine easily which one is dead and which one is not. But the greener one may be diseased or on their way to dying as well, so you have to be careful. So this perspective says the growing threat of multi-year droughts, understanding and monitoring ecological responses is important as droughts last longer. So we'll also look at another article that talks about multi-year La Niñas, and usually La Niñas can be associated with droughts in some parts like western US and so on. So things are changing. We know that with warming, everything tends to project onto natural modes of variability, but their periods, duration, intensity, frequency, scale, etc. change, like for heat waves, extreme rainfall events, etc. So droughts have major societal and ecological impacts, including drinking water shortages, crop failures, tree mortality, wildfires, and reduced ecosystem productivity. Shifts in the hydrological cycle and continued warming with climate change are leading to rapidly evolving droughts that are more intense and longer lasting. So there is some data that is shown with the trends. Extreme but short-term droughts can have a wide range of consequences depending on the severity and timing of the drought, as well as an ecosystem's resistance. Plus, if a drought coincides with the heat wave, then things get amplified. Vapor pressure deficit goes up, rainfall is reduced, soil moisture is desiccated, and vegetation begins to dry up as well. However, as a drought extends to a multi-year event, these ecological effects can amplify both short-lived buffering from physiological adaptations, or water storage may weaken, leading to longer lasting results. So plants have evolved to respond to short-term perturbations, but depending on the speed with which perturbations evolve and how long they last or how intense they are, their adaptations may not work anymore. So on page 278 of this issue of Science, Chen et al. 5, we'll look at that, report that increasing precipitation anomalies and atmospheric moisture demands are leading to multi-year droughts with growing impacts on vegetation. This highlights the need to better understand the ecological responses to such drought events. So drought is the driver, but then you want to understand how the forests and crops will respond to those, in addition to water resources for human beings and other species, of course. Severe societal and ecological disruptions were seen in several prominent multi-year drought events, such as the US Dust Bowl in the 1930s, which lasted for almost 10 years, the Australian Millennium Drought, which also lasted almost a decade, and a California drought, which on and off is still going on, and the Central European drought 2018 to 2022. The California drought especially is worth keeping in mind because the climatological condition there is dry, and that's related to the cold temperatures off the coast and the eastern Pacific, which is a normal condition, but La Nina makes the colder conditions in the East Pacific stronger, and global warming pattern is such that it is warming less or even cooling in the Eastern Pacific. So that is an amplification of the natural mode of variability, which affects California drought as well. Ecological responses can increase in nonlinear ways as a drought persists beyond a year. For example, grassland productivity can increase up to threefold in the second year of drought compared with the previous year. So you have a buildup of the stress. This is because continued water stress can exceed the plant's physiological threshold and increase the likelihood of progressive death of plant tissue and even mortality, so they can't keep up anymore. Prolonged drought can also deplete deep water storage, as seen during the fourth year of a multi-year drought event in California, which led to substantial increase in tree mortality. But California is also complicated by so many people living in a dry place and all that agriculture that is basically not suitable for that region, so water mining is very common. Thus, droughts with durations that exceed historical climate variability could drive major reductions in vegetation growth and increase plant mortality. Loss of key plant species or functional groups can have long-term consequences on the composition, structure, and function of an ecosystem. The focus on ecosystem is basically to say maybe agriculture is managing the situation with irrigation. Of course, we are paying a price in terms of groundwater depletion, but nonetheless the crop response to heat will be maybe evident within a season, but maybe drought can be managed with irrigation. Chenatal mapped the global distribution of multi-year droughts between 1980 and 2018 using standardized precipitation evapotranspiration index (SPEI). Standard precipitation evapotranspiration index is commonly used, and this estimates the severity of a drought using the difference between precipitation and potential evaporative demand. Okay, that's what they track here in terms of stresses. Of the 13,176 multi-year drought events recognized, imagine just between 1980 and 2018 there were 13,176 multi-year droughts across the globe. The top 10 most severe droughts were identified on the basis of spatio-temporal extent, duration, SPI magnitude, and likelihood of being reported in the literature. So it's a meta-analysis. Chenatal observed that multi-year droughts grew in spatial extent over this period, with the affected area becoming warmer and drier compared with pre-drought periods. This change in drought resulted in mostly negative effects on vegetation. Although such observations are valuable for describing the patterns and trends in multi-year droughts, understanding the mechanisms that drive the ecological responses to droughts is also essential. These responses are not only affected by the characteristics of a drought, but also by the traits of species presented in an ecosystem. For example, plants in water-limited ecosystems often have traits that provide resistance to drought. However, the effects of drought can also vary across species because diverse drought strategies such as tolerating low leaf water content or avoiding the impacts from surface water depletion but with deeper roots can coexist within a given plant community. So you can see that the system optimizes its response at species level and ecosystem level. There are lots of details now coming out about how fungi network work to manage nutrient distribution in an ecosystem, not just at a plant level, and so on and so forth. So ecosystem is very complicated and it knows what it's doing, but we are doing something that it's never seen before in terms of the speed of change, right? Chenatal assessed the response of vegetation to drought through space-bound observations of greenness using the kernel normalized difference vegetation index, so KNDVI, as a proxy. You can follow up more on the details. I'm not going to go into it. The NDVI exists since the I would say late 80s at least. Jim Tucker from NASA Goddard, I think, may have been the first guy to start that, but nonetheless there is a KNDVI as well. One notable finding was that multi-year droughts with the most severe climate anomalies did not always have the largest plant responses. The effects of multi-year droughts on vegetation also varied by ecosystem type. Of course, that's expected. Grasslands in temperate climates showed higher amounts of greenness declines compared with the subtropical and tropical forests during a multi-year drought. Okay, temperate grasslands seemed to be more vulnerable. Grasslands were generally characterized to have low drought resistance, but they often recovered rapidly post-drought. It's like a lawn that seems to die out, but then one rain and suddenly it's all back, right? Although the results of Chen et al. Demonstrated important differential responses across ecosystem types, The authors acknowledged that the moderate resolution of greenness data could have missed physiological responses as well as background plant mortality, which may portend long-term changes in the composition, structure, and function of an ecosystem. We'll look at a table in a minute. Looking forward, advances in remote sensing techniques could provide promising new insights that move beyond vegetation greenness and offer a more comprehensive understanding of multi-year drought impacts on ecosystem dynamics. The KNDVI used by Chen et al. Is less prone to signal saturation in densely vegetated ecosystems such as forests compared with the widely used NDVI, so that's why they are using this one. Yet KNDI is still based on vegetation greenness and may underestimate functional responses of vegetation to drought. So it's a tricky problem. Maybe drones can be flown to calibrate these things. I'm sure that's happening anyways. This could bias an analysis of drought impacts, especially in ecosystems with evergreen plants that can stay green even during prolonged periods of drought. For instance, KNDVI was weakly correlated with vegetation productivity over a multi-year period in conifer forests and mixed grasslands with substantial shrubs. So some details there. KNDVI and other greenness-based indices track changes in photosynthetic potential and can miss drought-induced reductions in photosynthetic efficiency. So, as I said, the rate parameters are always tricky. How plants change their behavior in terms of photosynthetic efficiency, water use efficiency, and a response to single year drought versus multi-year droughts. These are very complicated. So, the results provide lots of insights but also point to a lot of data gaps. New satellite-based solar-induced chlorophyll fluorescence estimates could enable better approximations of vegetation productivity dynamics during a multi-year drought by capturing information that is related to both photosynthetic potential and efficiency. Another promising satellite measurement is leaf canopy temperature, which can provide insights into changes in stomatal conductance, how quickly water vapor passes through the leaf pores. Finally, satellite-based estimates of plant water content could be used as early indicators of drought stress and nonlinear mortality events in a plant community. Independent of the measurement technique being used, more accurate monitoring of multi-year drought impacts on vegetation will require high-resolution satellite observations that can better isolate the signals from the various plant types. So let's read the table first and then conclude this perspective part and then look at some results from the paper itself. I'm going to be brief on the paper because this perspective nicely captures the main points, but we need to look at some figures. Ecosystem transition scenarios with multi-year drought. In hypothetical ecosystem transitions, a forest shifts toward having more drought-tolerant species and a mixed grassland In hypothetical ecosystem transitions, a forest shifts towards having more drought-resilient species and a mixed grassland is dominated by annual grass after a multi-year drought event. So, as opposed to seasonal drought, you have annual grass. Both scenarios experience decoupling between ecosystem productivity and greenness. This is something you have to remember. Greenness is measuring chlorophyll, which is easy enough to measure by calibrating the radiances from satellites to get global maps, but productivity is carbon captured, and that's not so easy to measure always, even though we estimate net primary production, gross primary production, etc. using various empirical derivations. So forest, grassland, plant types, drought intolerant evergreen and drought tolerant evergreen. So 1 year drought, reduced productivity but no change in greenness, no changes in productivity and greenness if it is drought tolerant. Multi-year drought on the other hand, mortality, no greenness, so you can easily see it as the opening figure we saw. Reduced productivity and small reductions in greenness for a tolerant species. Post-drought replaced by drought-tolerant trees, so there is a quick response in the ecosystem. Recovery of productivity and greenness in a tolerant evergreen. So these are important to understand and to also see how they are mixed together. the intolerant and tolerant species, and what it means for the ecosystem as a whole. You can think of ecosystem health, which is like productivity, resilience, and complexity, and so on. So grasslands can be perennial or drought-tolerant shrubs, reduce productivity and greenness with 1-year drought mortality, but no greenness left by multi-year droughts, and they tend to be replaced by annual grass as an adaptive response because they are fast responding species. Drought tolerant shrubs, on the other hand, see no changes in productivity or greenness with 1-year drought, reduced productivity and small reduction in greenness with multi-year droughts, and recovery of productivity and greenness happens with the drought being over. So they have adapted, but these all depend on what we mean by multi-year drought, or how long does it have to last before species just disappear. Desertification, as we call it. Through experiments and observations, a robust understanding of the patterns and mechanisms of short-term droughts has been developed. However, a deeper understanding of multi-year droughts is still lacking. This is concerning given that such events are growing in size and impact, potentially exceeding ecological thresholds and adaptive capacities of natural as well as human managed ecosystems. So then a jump or a shift into a desertification can happen. Future research efforts that incorporate advanced remote sensing approaches are needed to complement existing coordinated climate manipulation experiments such as DroughtNet, research networks such as the Long-Term Agro-Ecosystem Research Network, and ecosystem scale observation networks such as FluxNet, to improve our mechanistic understanding of multi-year drought and its ramifications on ecosystems at relevant spatial and temporal scales. So I will see if it's worth making a podcast on this DroughtNet, because I like climate solutions, even though when we do climate manipulations, there are always unintended consequences that can be, leave you much worse than before. I'm squiggling a little bit here today because I've sprained my ankle during one of my outings, running and doing all kind of stair climbing and so on, because I'm getting ready for a hike, and then I ended up hurting my ankle. So the paper itself, megadrought increase in the occurrence and impact of global increase in the occurrence and impact of multi-year droughts. So it's called megadroughts on top. Persistent multi-year droughts, MYD events, pose a growing threat to nature and humans in a changing climate. We identified and inventoried global MYDs by detecting spatio-temporally contiguous climate anomalies, showing that MYDs have become drier, hotter, and led to increasingly diminished vegetation greenness. Global terrestrial land affected by MYDs has increased at a rate of 49,279, but almost 25% uncertainties in terms of square kilometers per year from 1980 to 2019, almost 50,000 square kilometers. That's a per year, so that's a trend. Temperate grasslands have exhibited the greatest declines in vegetation greenness during MYDs, whereas boreal and tropical forests have had comparably minor responses. Is that a good thing? Does this indicate resilience? Is there a threshold beyond which they will stop responding this way? With MYDs becoming more common, this global quantitative inventory of the occurrence, severity, trend, and impact of MYDs provides an important benchmark for facilitating more effective and collaborative preparedness toward mitigation of and adaptation to such extreme events. So here is a figure, occurrence of the top 10 multi-year drought events within the period of 1980 to 2018. The main thing you would want to notice is that pretty much the entire globe is affected. Some part of every region is at least partly affected, and you can see the zoom-ins. So 1 is here, the top 1, 2 is here, 3 is here, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Basically, it depends on the way the multi-year drought is defined, so extent, the duration, and so on can be used. So here they are labeled by years, so you can follow up the methodology in the paper, but nonetheless, there are different periods over which these multi-year droughts with rankings have happened. The distribution of the top 500 multi-year drought events and different aspects of their severity across biomes during this period of 1980 to 2018. I'm not going into details, but obviously we'll have tundra, boreal forests, temperate grasslands, montane forests, tropical and subtropical forests, and the combined SPEI and KNDVI index goes from no effect to very severe effects. And again, now you can see the spatial scales as opposed to multi-year droughts, which are, let's say, restricted to here in this scale, but now you can see the spread into further into more regions than before. Okay, so this is SPI based and KNDVI based. So the methodology tries to separate precipitation impact and the potential evapotranspiration impact in terms of the multi-year droughts and combined severity as well. Okay, so I'm not going into any of the details because I just want to give you a sense. And this figure C here is basically combined severity. So this is for SPEI, KNDVI, and combined. Okay, so I'm giving you an intro. You can follow up, but there are many details, and there are some insights, very important insights, as we said, but obviously data is not sufficient to extract all the details. Now you combine other data, plan for more data, and combine with modeling to put all the details behind the kind of table we looked at in terms of drought intolerant and drought tolerant forests and grasslands. MYDs have occurred on all evaluated continents except Antarctica since the 1980s, and they have become more widespread, warmer and drier, and exerted growing impacts on natural vegetation. Several top 10 MYDs that we identified, such as those in the southwestern United States, Amazonia and Congo, have already been highlighted as exceptionally devastating droughts in the literature. The top 10 nominated MYEDs that either lasted to a decade, multi-year extended droughts such as those in Mongolia and southern United States, or were relatively shorter but featured considerable declines in vegetation greenness such as those in Australia, represent valuable case studies to prepare for similar events that may occur in more regularly in the 21st century. So we have to try to understand the responses, so see if there are engineering solutions or other ways of managing the impacts. Despite these limitations, in anticipation of increasing drought duration and extent of future droughts, treating droughts as spatio-temporally explicit events rather than focusing on a single year or season paves a more realistic way to develop adequate and fair mitigation strategies, which are currently designed only for single droughts but not necessarily for prolonged multi-year droughts. This is important because you may not have predictions that this will become a multi-year drought, but there may be many no-regret decisions that may allow you to prepare for multi-year droughts in your mitigation strategies for managing forests and grasslands, right? Because they are now an important part of my computer is acting slow here. They are now an important part of the nationally determined contributions of various countries as well. So MYED, I said extended, but actually it's multi-year ecological drought. As you know, there are meteorological droughts, deficit rain, agricultural droughts, tends to be soil moisture based impacts. Ecological droughts is what we are looking at, where the vegetation response is visible as well. Okay, so it's a bit long, but it's a good topic and important messages that I wanted to include. Okay, by the time I post this, it'll be several months at least, but nonetheless I keep recording so that I don't lose track of the most exciting new results. Okay,